You have 1 billion. You live like nobody has any idea. The secret life of ultra-rich. Not 1 million. Not 10 million. $1,000 million sitting quietly across accounts, trusts, and holding companies that most people will never learn the names of. And here is the strange part. Nobody around you has any idea. Not your neighbor. Not the barista who makes your coffee every morning. Not even some of your closest friends. You have built a life so quiet, so deliberately unremarkable, that the truth of your fortune could sit right next to a stranger on a park bench, and they would never once suspect it. This is the secret life of the ultra-rich. Not the yachts. Not the private jets splashed across gossip pages. Not the mansions with gold toilets that reality television loves to show you. That is the version of wealth built for cameras. The real version, the version that actually protects $1 billion for generations, looks almost nothing like that. It looks like silence. It looks like invisibility. It looks like you. You wake up in a house that, from the street, looks like any other well-kept home in a good but not flashy neighborhood. Maybe it has a slightly larger lot. Maybe the landscaping is a touch more manicured, but there is no gate with gold letters spelling out a name. There is no fleet of exotic cars parked in a circular driveway for the whole block to admire. You have long since learned that visible wealth invites two things you have no interest in: attention and danger. So the house stays modest on the outside, extraordinary on the inside, and completely unremarkable to anyone driving past. You have a car in the garage, and it is not the car people expect. Ultra-wealthy people who have held serious money for more than one generation almost never drive the car that screams new money. They drive something clean, well-maintained, sometimes even a few years old. A Land Rover, a Lexus, sometimes just a well-kept Toyota. Why waste depreciation and attention on a car that turns heads when the entire point of true wealth is that nothing about you turns heads at all? The Lamborghini in the driveway is not a billionaire. The Lamborghini in the driveway is usually a 26-year-old who just closed one good deal and wants the world to know it. You have already learned that lesson. You do not need the world to know anything. You have breakfast in a kitchen that is beautiful, but not built for photographs. No marble island the size of a small yacht. No gold fixtures glinting under studio lighting for an influencer video. Just quality. Quiet, understated, extremely expensive quality that only someone who actually knows craftsmanship would ever notice. The knives in your drawer cost more than most people's monthly rent, but they sit in a plain wooden block, unlabeled, because you have never needed anyone to recognize the brand for you to know its value. You have clothes that fit perfectly, are made from fabric most people have never even touched, and yet somehow look almost plain in photographs. This is not an accident. This is called quiet luxury, and it is one of the most consistent patterns among people who have held serious money for a long time. Logos are for people still trying to prove something. You are not trying to prove anything. You already have everything. The watch on your wrist might be worth more than a house in most American cities, yet it has no flashy dial, no diamonds, nothing that draws the eye of a stranger. Only someone who deeply understands watches would ever recognize what you are wearing, and that is exactly the audience you are dressing for. Not the crowd. The very, very few who would understand anyway. You have a job, or at least what looks like a job. Maybe you run a small consulting firm. Maybe you sit on the board of a foundation with a name so generic that nobody thinks twice about it. This is deliberate too. A visible occupation, even a modest one, gives you a reason to exist in the world that does not immediately draw questions about where the real money came from. It is a kind of camouflage, and it works because most people never think to question the story they are given. If you tell them you consult for small businesses, they picture a modest income, and move on with their day. They have no reason to imagine the truth sitting 3 inches beneath the surface. You have a name on your mailbox, but that name is rarely the one attached to the actual assets. Somewhere, tucked into layers of trusts, holding companies, and legal structures built by attorneys who charge more per hour than most people make in a week, your real fortune is held by entities with names that mean nothing to anyone. Blackwood Family Holdings. Meridian Trust Number 4. Names engineered to be forgettable because forgettable is the entire strategy. You have learned that the more boring something sounds, the less likely anyone is to ask a second question about it. You have children, and this is where the secret life becomes almost heartbreakingly deliberate. Because you know something most parents never have to think about. You know that if your children grow up believing money is unlimited, believing that consequences do not apply to them, you will not be raising heirs, you will be raising liabilities. So you have made choices that would shock people who assume unlimited wealth means unlimited indulgence. Your children have jobs in high school, actual jobs, scooping ice cream or stocking shelves, not because you need the income, but because you need them to understand what an hour of labor is worth, before they ever learn what $1 million is worth. Your children fly economy on family trips more often than they fly private, because you want them to sit in an airport terminal and understand that the world does not part like the Red Sea just because their last name carries weight. You have watched other wealthy families lose everything not to bad investments, but to children who never learned the value of $1, because nobody ever let them feel its absence, even for a moment. You have a philosophy about money that took years to develop, and it is almost the exact opposite of what popular culture assumes. Popular culture assumes that having $1 billion means an end to worry, an end to discipline, an end to restraint. But you have learned that the opposite is true. The people who keep $1 billion, who actually grow it across decades and pass it down through generations, are almost always more disciplined with money than someone earning $50,000 a year. You still look at price tags. Not because you cannot afford the item, but because the habit of noticing value is the same habit that built the fortune in the first place, and you refuse to let it die just because the number in the account grew large enough that most people would stop noticing. You have learned the difference between rich and wealthy, and it is a distinction that changes everything about how you live. Rich is a number, wealthy is a system. Rich people spend to show what they have. Wealthy people structure what they have, so it grows quietly whether they are paying attention or not. You have real estate held in trusts that generate income every single month without you lifting a finger. You have private equity positions in companies whose names you could not even pronounce correctly if asked, because you are not the one running them. You are simply one of the capital sources that allowed them to exist. You have a portfolio spread across asset classes so wide that a single market crash, even a brutal one, would barely register as a dent. This is the actual architecture of $1 billion. Not a number sitting in a checking account, a carefully constructed web of ownership stakes, income streams, and legal protections that most people never see because it is designed quite intentionally never to be seen. You have advisors, and this is perhaps the most invisible part of the entire operation. A team of people, some of whom you speak to weekly, some of whom you have never even met in person, quietly managing tax strategy, legal exposure, philanthropic structuring, and generational planning. You have an attorney whose entire job is to make sure that when you die, your children do not lose 40% of everything you built to estate tax. You have an accountant who has spent decades learning every legal mechanism available to reduce your tax burden, not through anything illegal, but through the same tools available to anyone who can afford the expertise to use them properly. You have a family office, a private team that exists purely to manage your affairs, the way a small corporation manages a business. Except the business is simply your life and your legacy. You have privacy lawyers too, because in the modern world, privacy is no longer something you are given. It is something you have to actively purchase and protect. Public records that could reveal your net worth are scrubbed where legally possible. Properties are held under LLCs, specifically so a simple online search of your name reveals nothing but a clean, quiet, unremarkable digital footprint. You have made peace with the fact that true privacy in the 21st century is one of the single most expensive things a person can own. More valuable in some ways than the money itself. Because money without privacy invites danger, invites lawsuits, invites people who see you not as a person but as a target. You have learned to fear a very specific kind of attention. Not admiration, attention, because admiration is what people crave, but attention, real attention, from the wrong people, is what ends fortunes and sometimes ends lives. You have read the stories. Families targeted for kidnapping because their wealth became public knowledge. Children extorted because a classmate's parent recognized a last name from a magazine article. Entire fortunes drained by lawsuits, filed by people who assumed, correctly or not, that a visibly wealthy target would rather settle quietly than fight publicly. You have learned that visibility is a tax, an invisible tax, but a tax nonetheless. And you have chosen, again and again, not to pay it. You have relationships with other wealthy families, but even those relationships operate under a code of quiet discretion. Dinner parties where nobody discusses net worth. Golf outings where the subject of money is almost taboo, replaced instead by conversations about art, about travel, about children, about anything except the actual scale of what everyone at the table controls. You have learned that among the truly wealthy, the biggest social sin is not having money. It is talking about it. The moment someone begins boasting about numbers, everyone in the room quietly reassesses them, not with admiration, but with suspicion. Real money does not need to announce itself. It has never needed to, and it never will. You have hobbies that most people would find almost boringly normal. You garden. You read. You collect something quiet, like first edition books or antique maps. Hobbies that require deep knowledge but produce no public spectacle. You have learned that the truly wealthy often gravitate toward interests that reward depth over display, because depth is private and display is exhausting. A yacht requires an audience to justify its cost emotionally. A quiet library filled with rare books requires only you alone in a room, enjoying something that nobody else needs to see for it to matter. You have moments, quiet moments, usually late at night, when you think about how strange this life actually is. You have more resources than entire small towns, and yet on any given Tuesday, you are indistinguishable from the accountant 3 doors down or the retired teacher across the street. You have chosen this. Every single piece of it was a choice. The plain car, the modest house, the children with summer jobs, the advisors nobody has ever heard of, the trusts with forgettable names. None of this happened by accident. It was engineered, piece by piece, over years, sometimes decades, by people who understood a simple truth that the rest of the world rarely gets to see. Wealth that wants to survive learns to disappear. You have watched what happens to families who chose the opposite path. The mansions on reality television, the cars posted on social media, the lifestyle broadcast in real time to millions of strangers. And you have watched, time and again, how quickly those fortunes crumble. Not always through bad luck, often through the simple, predictable pressure of visibility itself. Lawsuits multiply. Extended family members appear out of nowhere with demands. Children grow up believing the money is infinite until one day it is not, and nobody ever taught them what to do when the well runs dry. You have made sure your story will not end that way. Not because you are smarter than anyone else, but because you learned early that discretion is not a personality trait among the ultra-wealthy. It is a survival strategy. You have given money away too, more than most people would ever guess. But even this is done quietly. Donations routed through foundations with names too generic to trace back to you personally. Scholarships funded anonymously for students who will never know where the money truly came from. You have learned that public philanthropy, the kind splashed across headlines with your name attached, often creates as many problems as it solves. It invites requests, it invites resentment. It invites people who suddenly believe they are entitled to a piece of something you built over a lifetime of decisions they never had to make. So you give, generously, deliberately, and almost entirely without anyone ever finding out it was you. You have travel, but even that has changed shape over the years. Less about five-star hotels with your name on the reservation list, more about quiet, private accommodations booked under names other than your own. You have learned that hotel staff talk. Concierge desks remember faces attached to enormous tips. Even something as simple as a hotel reservation can become a thread that, pulled hard enough, unravels the careful privacy you spent years constructing. So you travel the way you live, quietly, comfortably, almost invisibly. You have security, real security, but it does not look like the bodyguards from the movies. It looks like a house with reinforced doors nobody notices, because they are painted like every other door on the street. It looks like cameras disguised as ordinary light fixtures. It looks like drivers who dress like everyone else, who blend into the background so completely that most people assume they are simply a friend giving you a ride rather than a trained professional whose entire job is your safety. You have learned that the best security is the kind nobody ever notices is there at all. You have a will, carefully constructed, revised more times than you can count, designed not just to distribute wealth, but to protect your children from the very money you are leaving them. Trusts that release funds slowly, over years, rather than all at once the day they turn 18. Conditions built in quietly, that reward education, that reward responsibility, that are structured specifically to prevent the kind of sudden windfall that has destroyed so many young lives across so many wealthy families before yours. You have seen what happens when 18-year-olds inherit millions overnight, and you have made absolutely certain your own children will never become another cautionary tale whispered about at other people's dinner parties. You have thought, more than once, about what it would even mean to live the loud version of this life. The version everyone assumes exists. The version with cameras and mansions and headlines. And every single time you have concluded the same thing. That version is not freedom. That version is a cage built from other people's expectations. A life lived entirely for an audience that will forget you the moment something shinier comes along. Your version, the quiet version, the invisible version, is the only version that actually feels like freedom. Nobody watching, nobody judging, nobody positioned to take anything from you, because nobody even knows there is anything to take. You have $1 billion, and here is the final truth, the one that took the longest to understand. The money was never actually the goal. The money was simply the tool that purchased the real prize, which was choice. The choice to live exactly how you want, unmonitored, unbothered, unrecognized. The choice to walk through a grocery store on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon and have absolutely nobody turn their head. The choice to raise children who understand the value of work before they ever understand the scale of their inheritance. The choice to give generously without needing applause for it. The choice, above all else, to simply exist, quietly, powerfully, invisibly, in a world that assumes wealth always announces itself, when the truth, the real secret of the ultra-rich, is that the wealth that lasts the longest is almost always the wealth nobody ever sees coming. You have $1 billion. And nobody, absolutely nobody, has any idea at all